Yeah, thanks everybody for coming. Today we're going to talk about scaling product management. This is something I'm pretty passionate about. The funny thing is you actually won't hear that much product management stuff in here because really when I talk about product management, I often relate back to company strategy. And I think that's ultimately the most important thing that you can do now. Pre-institutional investment, through fundraising, having that button down helps you tell a great story to investors, and then beyond, as you build out the product team, you hire your first VP, an institutional investor. So that's kind of the scope of what we're going to be going through. Bonjour, I'm Drew. That's all the French I've got, so sorry for that. Previously, director of product at Yammer, I was employee number 60 there, and then through 450 in the acquisition by Microsoft, so kind of saw that whole hyper-growth thing go on. Then I was a VP of product at a little YC company called AnyPerk. AnyPerk's a HR tech startup focused on the benefits and rewards space. And then after that, I was a chief product officer at a company called Schedulo. All of this doesn't really say much about what I've actually done, which is kind of a funny thing. Because in the meantime, I've been running product organizations, data, design, IT, support, customer success. What else have I done? I think that's all of it. There's probably 4 more teams I'm forgetting. So when they watch the video, I apologize. But I've taken that now and just at the beginning of the year, taken that and decided rather than go and immediately throw myself back in another job, can I basically package up parts of that and deliver it as a service to early stage startups, even up through large public companies, to use just some part of what I do. And that's what I've been doing since January. It's been a lot of fun. You can find me on Twitter at Drew Dill. Please also send poutine and bagel recommendations there. Nothing I can Google, hopefully. I plan on eating nothing but those 2 things while I'm here. So quick level set, the room. How many teams have somebody who's been a product manager before? Cool. How many have product managers today? Cool. And then how many have a VP of product? Okay, so all those, we had a small handful. Fortunately, that last one was a trick question. It's a trick question because you're the VP of product. If you are a CEO of a company that doesn't have a leader, you are that functional leader. So if you don't have a VP of product, you're the VP of product. I also just inform you that you have an HR department, so you can stop making jokes about not having an HR department. You are the HR department. And you are the VP of product for a while, from founding till basically you can hire that first VP, which is probably sometimes after Series A. So this is a long period of time. And it's a period of time, and it's a really important role. So what I want to do is give you the tools to do it really well. I should also say, everything's fine. Chaos is stage appropriate, and chaos can be generative. So if things seem like they're falling down, it is fine. At 450 employees at Yammer, things still seem like they're on fire and the wheels were coming off all the time. It's okay. So anything that I tell you, these are good pieces of advice. Take as much as you can. But if you feel like you're failing in some area, that is not something you should stress about. So when I think about product, I ultimately ask the singular question. I ask this in interviews. I ask this when I meet product managers from other companies. And that question is, how does an idea become a feature at your company? From the first time somebody, a customer, prospect, employee says, hey, we should do this thing, to the time that it hits the market, and even beyond, how we communicate and talk about what we did, that process itself, both running it and optimizing it, are the role of product. So making sure that we have the best, smoothest transition from an idea to a feature humanly possible, and then making sure that we're constantly optimizing how that gets done to get better and better. And that to me is a summary of all you need of a product organization, whether you're a tech company or selling auto parts. So given that, you think about early prioritization, where I'm sure a lot of you are, which is basically big strategic things that you know you have to do, stuff you've told the board and committed to investors and the way you describe your company to your friends. And then there's your AWS bill and your email server falling over. And then there's customer XYZ who wants this really, really super specific tiny thing, and they're going to pay you $1 trillion for it. Because at early stage, everything either looks like gold or it's on fire, and sometimes it's both. And it's hard to figure out exactly how you do the right things when you have this molten gold about to pour over your head. So I'm going to give you 10 steps. We're going to go through this reasonably quickly, and then we'll go to, there's a little bit of a workshop-y session. So there's a worksheet. Not many speakers will give you a website and tell you to go there while they're talking, but go ahead and pull that up if you want. Sorry, I meant to put in a QR code, but it's bit.ly/scaling product. You'll find a PDF there. That's our worksheet. You can keep that open while I'm talking and actually take notes. We're going to go through kind of each of the sections in there, and afterwards, if we have some time, we can maybe form up small groups and talk about them, and I can walk around and help you with them. Cool. So the first step, the first thing that you need to do that you can do right now, the day that you go back to your company this week, separate evaluation and execution. And what I mean by that is all early stage companies have this thing that I call the feature pile. Because everybody's dumped in all the ideas of everything that we could do, all of our users, all of our customers, all of our employees. Sometimes they've got like 12 different feature piles in like Jira and Asana and the support queue, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just kind of an unordered list of things that the company could do that are somewhat in the vein of the things the company currently does. What happens next is the CEO, whoever the head of product is, basically takes the top of that list and orders it. Because this list is now, and you'll see this grow as you get to a company of a reasonable size, it's infinitely long, and thousands of ideas. Some of them are repetitive, some of them overlap. But you can only really ever grapple with the first couple. So I call this the Proto Roadmap. And the CEO first takes all the top things, the things that we see as being really important, and then puts them in some kind of order. So changing the sign-up button copy, investigating using a blockchain, adding profile pictures, building an iPhone app, integrating with Salesforce. There's nothing inherently wrong with a list like this, and which is funny because CEOs kind of sheepishly show you the Proto Roadmap with shame in their eyes. There's nothing wrong with it. You can imagine a company that needs all of these things. The challenge is just that it's a jumble. There's no good story to tell about why you're doing these things, and often when you talk to the CEOs and you look down the list, you get to that first item, you get to item number 10 or so, and the CEO looks you in the eye and says, we would never build that. Then why is it on the list? So the first thing you need to do, separate the stuff you're thinking about and the stuff you're going to do. The benefit here is it also trains your employees, your customers and partners and stuff, that they're not just going to get everything that they ask for, which is a really important lesson to drive through product management. When you ask for something, we're going to sit down and think about it. We're going to decide whether it makes sense for our company, and then if it makes sense for our company, then we're going to do it. And then it goes to the execution queue. So under consideration here, we've got inherently two of the larger things, and using a blockchain, integrating with Salesforce, those are very large. You should take a lot of time to think about things like that. And then the to-do, where I'm imagining here a mobile company, so building an iPhone app is not optional. It's a critical part of what they're doing. And don't get bogged down in the tools as you do this. I see a lot of people basically then struggle to get AHA set up, use Product Board, get Jira, all these things. The tools are completely irrelevant. I do this most of the time on Google Sheets. It works just fine. You can do it in Excel, it doesn't matter. The point is that you have your ideas, your requests, the infrastructure needs of your product as inputs into the system. They go into the system, which is zero loss. Everything goes in there, nothing is removed. That's an archival factor that you need to maintain. Next, you separate evaluation from what you're going to do, and especially reject a lot of things. The most important job for the product team is to say no, because there's an infinite number of things that we could build, and there's a very narrow spectrum of things that we should. So rejecting things and forming a framework for rejection is one of the most important things you can do. And then, only then, do you have a plan. All the steps leading up to this of generating ideas and talking about them hasn't resulted in an idea of what to do yet. So step 2, prioritize. And you can think of, and this should be somewhat apparent now, that it's really hard to prioritize these big strategic features against these small tactical features. But it's really hard to understand why that is. The big strategic stuff is obviously the stuff that drives the company. So why is it so hard to do that when I've got a customer asking me to change the button copy? The problem is ultimately that you're doing product two-dimensionally. You're evaluating product from within product. Improving Android nav versus speeding users through sign-up. Both are important. Speeding users through sign-up means higher user count, which means more growth, which means more users, more engagement, more invites, etc. Improving the Android navigation might improve retention within the Android app. And if you're a company that sells, if you're doing a lot of consumer or SMB, that's really, really important. But there's no, what numbers do you use to compare the two? You can't in a reasonable fashion. Because what you're ultimately looking at is flatland. If anybody's read that, there's a book from the 1800s about basically creatures that live in a two-dimensional universe. And the creatures are lines or geometric objects. They have some properties, like they don't change in size rapidly like regular organic creatures and stuff. And they live happily on this flat land. The little square does visit one-dimensional land, but we'll start out with two-dimensional land. One day in flat land, they're visited by a circle. And a circle is nothing new in flat land. They've got a lot of circles. But the difference is this circle says he's not from here. And the circle grows and grows, and things don't grow in flat land. The problem is that flat land is trying to engage with the circle on a two-dimensional level when it's actually a sphere that's passing through flat land. And so they try and grapple with this small object, which is a tiny slice of the overall whole that is coming for them. This whole ball could crash right through flat land and kill them all. And that's the point. Strategy is multi-dimensional. Tactics are a single dimension. So it's really hard to evaluate your three-dimensional company strategy within the vein of product. You can't. You have to have a strategic understanding of what the business needs to do and use that to drive what the product needs to do. So step 2 isn't actually prioritize, it's find yourself. You have to really realize who you are and use that to drive your product strategy. Everybody comes up with these wonderful, fluffy unicorn positioning statements and mission statements when they get to a big enough size where they're going to change the world through this and that and do all these fluffy, fuzzy things. Those are important when you get to that size because they still give you some bounds over your massive opportunity and your thousands of engineers. At a handful of people at a startup, that doesn't work. Thankfully, we just did a whole session on this, so I don't have to do too much more on positioning. But ultimately, your product strategy is driven through your company position. And that's the first thing you need to do. What does your company need to be doing to succeed? And use that to drive everything else. So a really simple positioning statement here. For your customers, your company is service definition, better than competitors because reasons. And we'll go through each one of these. So your customers, who are they? They're a big company, small company, woman with a dog with a robot. Who are they? What are they doing? What do they care about? What do they read? This will inform your product in terms of your design. What sites are they using? If you're developing a site for people over 50, they're a lot more comfortable using bank software than they are using Facebook. So you have to think about things like that. If you are trying to sell basically 3D printers, there's only so many people that actually want to talk about 3D printers and get articles out there about 3D printers in a given year. So you got to think about, okay, who are my sub-constituents of the 3D printing community and how do I reach them? And the answer is go through like a food magazine and do food carving and stuff like that. Next is your service definition. This is the most boring part of the whole thing, and it should be boring. You should be as specific as possible to say exactly what you're doing. What is the literal thing that you expect your company to be able to achieve for your customers in the next 2 years? The more specific you get, the better it is, because the clearer you can state exactly to the user what they're going to get out of using your product. So really boring, simple example, we host a website and mobile app that does X. We provide software and services around the delivery of Y, etc. After that, competitors. List them out. Be super honest. We always have that one competitor that we're terrified of, that we always try and downplay. Oh, it's not that guy. They don't really bother us. They play in a totally different market. They play in your market. They are coming after your users and your money. They're a competitor. Also, list out people that are don't just compete with you for the specific project that you're working on, but people who compete with you for budget, for attention. Slack doesn't see an intranet as a real competitor. An intranet doesn't really see Slack as a competitor, but there's only one collaboration budget. So ultimately, those two are going to duke it out over that collaboration budget. So you got to think through even that. Who are we fighting against, and what are the other products in the mix? And then the better than reasons. This is your reason for existing, your unfair advantage. What makes you special? What makes you better? Is it your people? Is it your approach? Is it your systems? What's that tack that you're taking? Pick your top three things that make you the very best. And then these become the checklist. Any new decision that we make, does it violate these three things? Or are we enhancing the things that make us competitive in the market? Something I like to think about a lot when I discuss this is there's a book called The Discipline of Market Leaders. They did an overview survey of all Fortune 500 companies and what made them great, and basically broke it down into three simple buckets. One, product leadership. So product leadership is Apple. I know what you want before you want it. I'm going to give it to you before you even knew you needed it. So the iPhone is the quintessential product excellence example. Customer intimacy, this is something like a Nordstrom or a Zappos. This is less about projecting your thing to the customer and more about understanding exactly who they are and tailoring towards them. So for example, any employee of the Ritz-Carlton has a $10,000 a year budget just to fix problems for people who stay there. That's customer intimacy. A lot of this ends up being basically your investment process. If I have $1, where do I stick it? Do I put it in the product team or do I do it in customer service? The last is operational excellence, and this is your penny pinching one. So FedEx, Walmart, Costco, if they've got $1, they're using it to figure out how to save $10. And they just continually drive down prices. And the book says basically you have to be commensurate in all of them. You can't be mediocre in any one. So you need to be competent operationally. You need to be responsive to your customers, and you need your product to differentiate itself. But past that, you need to really excel at one of these things. If you try and do all of them, you will ultimately, it says you'll fail. And I think the ultimate one challenge that we have a lot in product and startups is that we all want to be product leaders. It's really fun to be the product leader. It's really fun to throw on the Steve Jobs turtleneck and go announce the iPhone. But that's not what your customers want or your users want all the time. If you're, as I did, work in HR tech, customer intimacy is significantly more important. Getting to know the HR teams and how they're running their organizations, significantly more important. Similarly, you can think of Uber Black, way back when it launched with just the town cars, they were product leaders. Nobody knew that they wanted a car that you could get with your phone at the time. But they delivered that. Later, as Lyft came out and started challenging them on the ride sharing and driving costs down, they both shifted to operational excellence. Lyft let people now sit in the back, they got rid of the mustaches, and really all you were left with like a pink brand and otherwise two fairly identical car companies. So understanding why your company will succeed at this level helps you draw out additional points of those reasons of how you're going to be successful. Remember, everything's fine. If you don't have all of this nailed down, and you probably don't, it's totally fine. And also, this is going to seem like a lot of pieces that you need to do, that I'm giving you a ton of work. Get as far as you can. People are busy. Pull in, especially your early team, should be as close to co-founders as possible. So if you have engineers or people who think more broadly about these topics, lean on them as well. Next is setting goals. And there's a whole emerging field of goal setting, OKRs, and all of these wonderful things and products and stuff like that. I'm not going to talk about all that stuff because it doesn't really make a lot of sense at a Series A startup. What you do need to set is one top-line goal. What's the one thing that we're going to get done in the next 6 to 9 months? And if we do nothing else, we need to have achieved this goal. The biggest challenge with the top-line goal is, especially at early stage, you're always thinking about the next fundraising. And the next funding event tends to drive revenue. And so revenue tends to drive a lot of how we think about what we need to do. But revenue is a trailing indicator of success. Your indicator of success should be this. So we need to serve this new industry. I was working with a cannabis company just 2 weeks ago, and their 6-month plan was actually to shift massively towards hemp, because hemp is going national in the US. It's already nationally legal or federally not illegal. And their assumption is that the FDA regulations that will get passed down for hemp will apply to marijuana when it goes legal across the US. So basically serving the hemp industry is their 6-month plan, and that will drive product strategy now, because the hemp industry has different product needs. So I was getting a little loose. We need to establish ourselves as leaders in the space. I have done this one. Be careful. You have to be pretty far along before you can actually establish yourself as a leader. You can't start from zero and get to be a leader. So things like this then drive the next level of strategy. But do be careful with process. It probably feels like total chaos right now. And then people want to they hire 15 execs from Google to come bring in their biannual Big Co OKR process and wonder why engineering slows to a complete crawl and they can't ship stuff anymore. Goals are important so that every employee can tie what they're doing to the outcome of the company and what the company needs. But beyond that, they get really, really overbuilt. And so just be really careful about that. Next, you have to categorize. Humans need labels. We need labels to basically prioritize and understand why we do things. So take that top line goal, and now you'll form very simple sub-goals underneath that. Your lieutenants will mostly come up with these. Your salesperson will have an idea, your marketing person. It's great, actually, if they're cross-functional as much as possible. But even under these sub-goals, now you're going to have your features. They're now categorized by their relationship to what the company needs to do in the next 6 to 9 months. And now you can reason about those three-dimensional objects when they come down and now are competing with a customer demand or a support issue. So now you can prioritize. Because now we have a framework for reasoning about 3D strategy against 2D tactics, a list of things under consideration, a list of committed work, and you can now reason about the work that needs to be done and balance it against revenue and other burning issues. And that is pretty good. If you get within spitting distance of that before raising a Series A, I would say you're top decile of well-organized companies. So getting this much done, it would be massively impressive. And it's a huge benefit of fundraising. Look at all these things, who your customers are, what you're doing for them, who you're competing against, why you're going to beat them, what the company needs to do in the next 6 months, how that drives near-term product objectives. It's basically the Sequoia pitch deck. All those red stars are stuff that we just talked about. So this is all work that you need to be doing to raise money, but the reason they want to see it is because it drives a lot of your strategy. So there's a win-win here of getting your stuff together and then also being able to present it really well. Next step is estimation. If you come from an engineering background, I apologize for everything I'm about to say for the next 5 minutes. Estimation in the engineering world is somewhere between the most important thing you can possibly do and a curse set upon us by Hades that we've never gotten rid of. I do very simple estimates to start with. We call it t-shirt sizing, small, medium, and large. You can just look over that product list that we had before and say, okay, changing button copy, that's an hour. Adding profile pictures, that's a couple weeks. Building an iPhone app, that's large. That's a significant investment. And then you could think about balancing that prioritization that we went through against the effort. So high priority, low effort, that's low-hanging fruit. That's easy stuff. This is time to impact right here. And you can pick these off immediately and really impress the hell out of customers. If you've done NPS surveys, stuff like that, look in your NPS for these things because customers love it. Nothing better than getting an NPS saying you have a 7, immediately turning around the feature that would get them up to a 9, and then flipping your point score up significantly. Low priority, low effort, whenever it's convenient. I usually have a queue sitting off to the side of just some work that we just rotate it through various engineers. Up, high effort, high priority, that's your strategy. Those are your three-dimensional objects. Those are the ones that are hard to prioritize. Low effort, low priority, defer. People will have very different opinions about what you can defer and what's low priority, but as the head of product, ultimately you are the product dictator and you get to decide the ultimate priority at the end of the day. A full planning exercise starts this way. It starts with a product plan, that's your top-down plan, and then your engineering plan, the bottoms up. So it's what do we need to achieve and what is possible for us to get done. So that's a full planning cycle. Unless you've got a really well-developed engineering process, you probably can't get there right now, but just to give you a glimpse of what that's like. Because that would feed into the next part, which is actually developing a roadmap. I'm sure VCs have asked you for roadmaps. If you sell large enterprise customers, they probably ask you for roadmaps. It's this kind of magical object that people don't really seem to understand, but it's actually pretty straightforward. If you squint hard enough, that feature list that we're looking at and the t-shirt sizes can turn into something that looks a lot like a Gantt chart. You know that small thing is going to take one person for a month, that medium thing is going to take 2 months, that large thing is going to take 3 or 4. And you can kind of start to space people out like that. The value of this is then you can go basically take these 2 things, slap them in a slide deck and say this is Q1, slap those 2 things in a slide deck, say it's Q2, and bada bing, everybody's happy with the roadmap. Of course, your engineers aren't happy with that roadmap because they are looking at this and saying, what if I get the sniffles, or I need to go on vacation, or do literally anything else? So the right version of a roadmap is usually about half of what you thought you could get done when you're looking at the spreadsheets. Revenue plans are similar. You can't just magically add 12 reps in a month. So if you commit to about half, you're going to end up being pretty happy and not disappointing too many people. I'd also say when you're building a roadmap deck, although I've got a feature slide up here, focus on those themes. Those challenges, the sub-goals that we talked about before, those are ultimately what the company needs to get done. And those are the challenges that you're working on. Because what happens after you build a roadmap deck, and what happens at a big company after they build a roadmap deck, is somebody builds the roadmap deck, and they get the feature, and the feature's not the right thing. At a big company, you have to fight all the levels of bureaucracy to get back up to the top and say, this isn't the right thing that we're building, nobody actually thought about this, but your boss committed to it in a roadmap deck to their CEO, and they're 50 levels up, so you can't get out of it. So the best way to start with a roadmap deck is actually start with the themes. Over the next 6 months, these are the challenges that we're going to be working on, and here are some of the ideas that we have on how we might address them. Try not to commit as much as possible. What you'll even find is if you go around and refine this with a bunch of your customers, they're going to tell you that you're wrong, and in what ways you're wrong, so you can actually continue to refine it with customers. And then when I do get down to the individual feature slides, focus on user value. What is the problem that we're trying to create? If you have to show a picture, keep it simple, and then a handful of bullet points. Here are the things our customers will care about. Here are the things our users will care about that we're going to get done in this project. Lastly is execution. You're already executing now, so I'm going to talk less about what it takes to execute and build software, and more about as we're now getting through the initial funding, now we're starting to think about building out a product team if you're one of the teams that already has some product folks. So I want to talk more about what you can expect out of your individual contributor PMs. First and foremost, they will be doing research. They will be the ones you'll be handing these projects to, and you should be handing them the projects with enough leeway that they can say this is dumb and we're going to do it completely differently. Next, they're going to work directly with customers and partners to make sure that they're getting the maximum value out of the products that you're putting out. They'll develop and work with design and then refine the overall approach with engineering, continuing to build that pipeline from idea to feature. Question CEOs ask a lot, how much should we be documenting? There's also one of the things that they say with a lot of guilt in their eyes. The answer is, of course, everything's fine. But the answer is you need just enough documentation to get the job done today. CEOs are busy. I know that the best meeting that you can have sometimes to talk about what you need to do is a whiteboard. And then sometimes it's just a single Asana task with just the subject filled out. I get it. It's all fine. But when you actually do get product people and you can really invest in the time, product specs and documentation are not only artifacts of understanding from the product person to the designer to the engineer, they're also archival artifacts. So later when your product team does grow, they will be able to look back on previous decisions that were made. So a minimum viable project spec for me is the goals of the project. What are you trying to do? Who's it benefiting? What's the value you're creating? Metric benefits, if they have specific numerical outcomes, we expect to boost user engagement, growth, monetization. The project team that worked on it, so people can go find those people and ask them the questions. Screenshots and bulleted lists describing critical functionality. So this is a big departure from early stage product management, which is actually getting into the UX. Because early stage product management is like, we got to build this thing, go figure it out. Later stage product management, you have to actually understand who the user is and figure out what they want to do and then actually go do that. So there are critical UX flows that only the person doing the research is really going to understand. Only the product person is going to have the depth of information. That said, if you do what I used to do when I worked at a big co and doing product, these massive product requirements documents that are detailed down to every single button pixel, all that does is tell your engineers that they don't get to make any decisions. If your engineers don't get to make any decisions, they don't feel responsible for the quality of the thing that they put out. They don't feel responsible for the quality of the thing they put out, you get a ton of bugs and your product sucks. So giving your engineers autonomy and considering them partners, but making sure that they nail those critical flows for that user. And then the fun stuff, then you actually get to scale. The number one question that comes up in scale is, who do I hire? Do I hire first a bunch of individual contributors, or do I hire leaders and have them build out the function? So there are a lot of different decisions here. This is a question that I would not, there's no blanket answer that I can resolve that for every startup. The thing to think about with individual contributors is if they are junior, you need to work with them a lot. If they're mid-level, they're looking for a path up, and if they're senior, they're looking for a leadership position. So that's the biggest challenge. A lot of people want to hire these kind of senior to director level product folks, but they see themselves as future VPs. So that's the biggest challenge in the IC role, is just finding somebody who's okay with the scale. Product teams don't grow that fast, so there won't be a ton of leadership opportunities. The flip side, you can hire that VP, but understand whether that VP has actually done the job recently. If they're a VP with a team of 0, you're going to want them to be writing specs. If they're going to have an attitude about writing specs, or they haven't written specs in a while, that's a problem. Something also to think about is basically team size. A good ratio of engineers to product manager in a web or mobile company is about 1 to 10. So one PM should be able to keep basically 3 to 4 project teams going and also still be working on a couple specs in the background. And here you need to be really honest with yourself as a CEO or founder, how much time you really have to put into it. If you really can only put in 25% of your time into product, you can really only support 3 engineers. So if you're thinking about blowing the team up to 10 this year and not hiring any PMs to support you, that's going to create a big problem. They're going to be sitting around not doing anything. And then a couple ideas of why you might want to hire a VP of product early. One is just overall complexity. A product that is super complex, very technical, needs a lot of different parts of understanding. You need somebody who can basically be across all the teams and understand all those different pieces and how they work together. Enterprise sales. Nothing helps out in enterprise sales like having execs that are visible. Customers always have input in the roadmap. If you're selling to large enterprise, they're not buying you because your product is awesome. They're buying you because your product is pretty good and they believe that you could be awesome for them in the future, and they'll get it really cheap right now, and they're not going to pay the enterprise price in the future. So what that means is they want to see your VP of product, and they want them front and center, and to be able to talk to them and ask them questions about what's going on. Next, of course, is high growth. Your engineering team's going to explode, then your product team's going to explode. You need somebody to quarterback hiring. Last one people bring up a lot is domain expertise. I'm less enamored of domain expertise as a reason to hire somebody. Maybe if it's a startup to another startup, but I don't think necessarily grabbing a VP of product from a large insurance company and sticking your insurance tech company is going to massively help you. I think it can slow you down a lot. So think through domain expertise and think through particularly what you're lacking. Think of that one critical component and look for that component rather than just broad, they've worked at an insurance company. So when you hire your VP of product, their expectations are going to manage this whole funnel from idea to delivery. They're going to optimize it. They're going to layer in ever better sources of data and feedback. And they're going to build a team into that new function. They're going to represent the company internally and externally in communication, writing in front of enterprise sales, at big talks like this. And so the next thing that you ultimately need to do is just let it go. You can't. CEOs who try and hold on too tightly to the product end up permanently frustrated because they don't have the time to really interact with the team on a meaningful level. And so the team gets frustrated because it feels like the CEO is doing the swoop and poop, and they don't have the ability to, anybody familiar with the swoop and poop? It's a pigeon reference, the pigeon management, they fly in, they poop all over everything, they fly off again. So if your manager, as CEO, you only have time for the swoop and poop, that is only going to make your employees angry. Nitpicking little product decisions all the time just doesn't work. So what you really need to do as a CEO is come up with the absolute level, what level of product do you want to interact at, and then what level of communication and input are you willing to put into that. So roadmap level, then the VP of product's going to talk to you quarterly. They're going to tell you what's going to happen over the next quarter, and as I told you, it's going to be in rough terms more about the value that they're creating than the specific features, and they'll ask for obviously ongoing feedback from the CEO as the head of product, but your interaction with the product team is actually on a more quarterly basis. If you're talking about those major themes, those top or those sub goals, the cadence of input is more like monthly. How are we doing on those sub goals? Are we keeping up with those sub goals in cadence with the top line goal, et cetera? Critical features and general functionality, this takes a lot more effort to get those very specific features right, to make sure that the overall product is healthy. That's at least a weekly cadence of a focused discussion about product with your head of product or the product team. And then if you really want to get down to the spec level, those independent little tiny pieces that happen in every single feature, that's a daily need. And that ultimately is why you hire the VP of product, is to take over that piece. So really it's about where you want to be involved and how much time you can put into it and balancing those two things. If you find that you want to be involved at the spec level but you don't have quarterly time, too bad. You're going to make every VP miserable and your product team is just going to keep churning people. So you really have to think about that. Okay, putting it all together. So first, as we talked about, you have to separate evaluation and execution, pull out the why or what we might do from the things that we are planning and have committed to do. Next, you have to find yourself, understand your organization from the core. What are your values? What do you care about? What's going to make you successful? Who are your customers? And what can you do with them? You have to set goals for the next 6 to 9 months. categorize your product features into those goals, prioritize against those goals and with the existing kind of burning gold queue. Estimate now in t-shirt size to figure out what might be able to get done in a given period of time. For those that ask and need, and especially for even just sharing with the company, build that roadmap. The roadmap is your basically agreement, or my agreement as a head of product with the rest of the executive team of what we're going to do and what we're going to care about over the next 6 months. Execute, 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 continually improving the execution. Scale the team, now thinking about bringing in a leader, building out the product function, adding a lot of those components that we didn't get to, things like research. And then finally, let it go. Figure out what level of communication you want to have with the product team, what level of input that you need to have on the product to feel connected to it, and then hand off the rest. So that was pretty quick. Kept it kind of quick so we can actually do the workshop piece too, but we do have time for questions. I'm also at the Mentor Tent Thursday about the same time. Feel free to email me, do that kind of stuff. I do this for a living. It was funny, I was actually preparing this talk and I hadn't actually done any of these things. I'd done these inside companies, but not in my freelance job. My last 3 clients have basically this is what I've done for them, so it's very much top of mind for me. I do this for a living, but I also do mentor and advise and stuff like that, and have a big belief in service, so I will put in a lot of effort for you. But yeah, then we'll go to questions, and then maybe after questions we can form out small groups, and if people have been filling out the worksheet, I can walk around and we can all kind of chat about the worksheets. Cool, so any questions? All right. Who all has been who wants to work on the worksheet? Does anybody want to raise hands so we can kind of group? You got one? All right, free advice over here. Cool. All right, thanks everybody.